Meet the World War II experts who work on the battlefield. This is the Bunker Boys Show with your host, Tony Cisneros.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Bunker Boys Show. If you're even remotely into World War II, this is the show for you. Episode 7 today. Can you believe it? We're already on episode 7. We have 3 more episodes to go before we finish out this season of the Bunker Boys Show. And we've decided we're going to go ahead and give you these next 3 episodes free of charge. We're not going to ask for any subscriptions to watch these last few episodes. We're going to go ahead and finish out the season. But we do need your help, you guys. We could really use your help. Anything you can do. If you want to subscribe, become a member, get some bonus features and some extra content from us about the show and more history. If you'd like to just give us a one-time donation, please, whatever you can do, it will really help us keep producing these episodes for you. So today we are talking to John Martin. He's over in the UK, and John is one of the world's leading experts on Operation Anthropoid. Anthropoid was the secret plan to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich. If you don't know who Heydrich was, you're going to find out here in just a moment. He was an extremely important person in the Third Reich. So let's get right into it. Here's John Martin. John, I always like to ask how people get involved in World War II. I mean, you've written books about this. You do tours in Prague. What's your personal connection? Do you have a personal connection to the war?
Yeah, I do. My father gave his wrong age, and my dad was too young to join up in 1939-40. And a couple of years later, he gave his wrong age and he lied about his age and joined the British Army. And he was put in a tank regiment in 1944, a specialist armour regiment called the 79th Armoured Brigade. And it was a tank regiment, from what I can believe, specially formed for D-Day. And it was tanks that didn't necessarily have guns, but they had specialist equipment for clearing barbed wire or, all kinds of specialist armour and bulldozers and this kind of thing. So yeah, that my dad, I'm very proud of that. My dad, he said it was the worst thing he ever did, by the way. He said he gave his wrong age and joined up, and he said, I regretted it from almost day 2.
I'm sure. And so now with Prague and the story of Reinhard Heydrich and his assassination in 1942. So what is your connection to that? Because you've written books, articles, and you do tours in Prague. So tell us how you found that story and what was your draw to that story.
Tony, it's a funny thing. I get asked this question so often. I have no personal connection whatsoever to it. No relatives. I'm not part Czechoslovak, anything at all. I just read the story. I love military history. I love all history. But I read the story in a magazine of Operation Anthropoid, the assassination of Heydrich. And I read this when I was a kid, and it just jumped out of the pages and just grabbed me. And I just thought, I'll have to find out more about this. And I just spent, all my grown-up years trying to research it and find people and find new evidence. And it's one of them things, we'll never know exactly what happened with Anthropoid, but yeah, it just grabbed me when I was a kid.
And so for our viewers who aren't aware of what Anthropoid was, it was this operation to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich. And he was an extremely important man in Hitler's Third Reich. John, can you tell us just a little bit about who this guy was and why this was such a significant event?
Yeah, Reinhard Tristan Eugene Heydrich was in charge of all Nazi secret intelligence, just one step behind Himmler in the SS, of course. And famously or infamously, he'd also been put in charge of the final solution. He chaired a conference in January 1942 at a place called Wannsee, just outside Berlin. And in just a couple of hours, they sat round a table with Heydrich in charge and decided the policy for the final solution. So this was a top operator for the Nazis, you know, a main player.
And what was Heydrich doing in Prague, John?
Well, I mean, you know, we could spend hours talking about this, but prior to Heydrich going to Prague, the man in charge there for the Nazis was a man called Konstantin von Neurath. And at the time in the Czech lands, what we now know as the Czech Republic, there was big factories dotted all over the place, huge factories, big Skoda factories, this kind of thing. And all these factories had been turned over to start to produce top-class military hardware and ammunition and parts and this kind of thing for the Nazi war machine, which they absolutely needed, you know, especially after the invasion of Russia. And the people in the Czech people started to get organized a little bit as best they could. And they started to basically slow down in the factories and production fell. So on the basis of this, Hitler was getting all these reports that production had fallen, that people are getting organized, there was resistance on an undercurrent. And so von Neurath was replaced by Heydrich.
And so now, as far as Anthropoid goes, this whole plan to kill Heydrich, really bold. But can you tell us kind of how the plan was born and who was involved? The paratroopers, obviously that were sent on this mission, and kind of how it played out.
Yeah, I'm not sure if your international viewers will know, but some of the Czech military intelligence came to Britain, and they eventually would set up a Czech government in exile under Eduard Beneš. And they were getting all these reports about how important Heydrich was and what the measures he was acting out on people in Prague and other places. And also they were getting terrific pressure in London because the Allies realized that all these armaments were being produced. And so they started to pressure the Czech military intelligence to say, look, you know, you can't carry on doing it. You have to do something here about this. And eventually a man called František Moravec, who'd escaped from Prague and came to London, he came up with this idea of Operation Anthropoid to take out Heydrich, assassinate Heydrich.
So the plan, now, what were they going to do? How were they going to kill this guy? Because obviously a man in that position would be pretty well protected, one would think. So what was the plan to kill him?
Yeah, you know, it's a strange thing. The men, of course, some of the Czechoslovak soldiers also arrived in Britain. And so some of these were selected and sent to various places in Britain for quite short-term training, you know, a bit of commando training, a bit of parachute training, and this kind of thing. And they were sent for this mission, for Operation Anthropoid, but to a large degree, they had no idea how they were going to do it. You know, they'd had some information, they didn't know how accurate it was, how up-to-date it was. They didn't know, of course, the situation on the ground. Of course they didn't. They were in Britain. They were getting bits of reports of where Heydrich would go and how he was, you know, and this kind of thing. But when they were parachuted to assassinate Heydrich, really it was a case of not quite make it up as you go along, but not far off. Make it up as you go along and do what you can. You know, they had Sten machine guns, they had a couple of grenade-type bombs, this kind of thing. And so they had to literally spend weeks and months following Heydrich and putting together a bit of a picture of, is there a way we can actually get at him? They looked to see if they could get at him at the big villa he'd taken over with his family to the north of Prague. They looked at maybe a train. Could they derail his train? Various ways, but you know, nothing was jumping out to say, well, this is the way. And eventually they realized if they followed the route that Heydrich took most days, there was a possibility that they could get close enough to attack him there. As you say, everywhere he went, he had security guards and SS with him and on official business. But eventually they came up with the idea that, you know, when he's traveling from one place to another, this could be the opportunity.
So you're saying they didn't have a real concrete plan when they left?
Absolutely not.
When they left
Absolutely
England?
not. Yeah, absolutely not.
They had to basically improvise. And so now this route that he took from his home, which was on the north side of Prague, into Prague, he was basically making the trip to Prague Castle. Is that right? Where he basically worked and had.
Well, again, you see. Again, we don't know that. We don't know for 100% sure. Remember I said earlier, there's a lot of things we don't know about Anthropoid. Some reports say he was going out to the airport, flying to France, maybe going back to Germany. We don't know for certain.
Okay.
But the chances are, I believe, he was on the way to his office in Prague Castle.
Okay.
And it was just him and the chauffeur. Him and the chauffeur, a man by the name of Johannes Klein was his chauffeur. So when the men decided, we found a place here where his car has to slow down. I mean, it was a very, very severe hairpin bend that they located. The Heydrich's car would normally come. And they reckon cars had to slow to about 15 miles an hour to take this bend. So they're in position, and they didn't know for certain that Heydrich was coming that day. They didn't know for definite, but they decided to wait it out.
So, John, when Heydrich's car slowed down in this curve, who was there and what happened next?
A man called Joseph Walczyk was stationed on the approach road that Heydrich was coming. And we know that he sent a signal to Gabčík and Kubiš, who were waiting at the bend, to say his car is coming. Now, most accounts say that Walczyk signaled with a little hand mirror to catch the rays of the sun. Maybe he also blew a whistle. There are reports that other members of the resistance were dotted about in case there was any police, any security guards, this kind of thing. There are other reports to say that a man called Adolf Polka, another parachutist who'd come from Britain, there are reports that he was at the scene and maybe he crossed the road in front of Heydrich's car to make it slow even more. But we don't know. And no one will ever know, I guess.
Yeah.
But as Heydrich's car slowed to take the bend, one man and you know, this is one of the things that gets me. It's always reported Czech soldiers. But the two men who were assassinating Heydrich, one was a Slovak, so they weren't Czechs, they were Czechoslovaks. So there was one man called Joseph Gabčík who had a Sten machine gun. And he'd broken this down into 3 parts. And he also carried a raincoat. And using the raincoat to cover, he reached down and reassembled the Sten machine gun. And the plan was, as Heydrich's car slowed to take the bend, he would reveal his Sten machine gun and shoot Heydrich in his car. And of course, we know that Heydrich's chauffeur drove the car around. Gabchik jumps out with his stem machine gun, points the gun at Heydrich, absolutely can't miss. He's literally just feet away, pulls the trigger and nothing happens. The gun jams. It's just incredible. You couldn't, if you wrote it in a fantasy play, people say, oh, you couldn't make that up. But it actually happened. His gun jammed. And in a second, his friend, Jan Kubish, who was further on the bend, he grabbed a grenade-type bomb that he had, tossed it underarm at Heydrich's car. And again, it missed the car. But it did explode near to the rear of the car. And Heydrich, I guess, made the mistake, apparently, telling his chauffeur to stop the car. Whereas, from what I can gather, any trained, proper bodyguards would get the car away from the scene as quick as possible. But right. Heydrich was with his chauffeur, who was a trained driver, not a trained bodyguard, and so he slammed on the brakes. So that gave Kubish a chance.
Yeah. John, why do you think Reinhard Heydrich told him to stop the car? Why do you think that? I mean, any idea?
Well, Heydrich was a great believer that he was the man in charge in Prague, and of course he was. But he believed he certainly had got these factories churning again. So he was the main man, and he was a some people say brave, some people say foolish, but no one would attack Heydrich, and he was absolutely feared by everyone. And I think that was part of his psyche. That right, let's how dare someone
a bit of arrogance.
At me. There's a man pointing a stem machine gun. He doesn't know Kubish has got a bomb just 2 or 3 foot away. But he just sees Gabchik with a stem machine gun and says to the chauffeur, stop the car. So the grenade blew up at the rear of the car, didn't land in the car, and it blasted through the seat that Heydrich was sat on. Heydrich was sat in the front passenger seat. If you ever see movies where he sat in the back while the show was just nonsense, he was sat in the front passenger seat.
And the movie that's fairly recent, you were involved in that, were you not?
Yes, I was. Yeah, the new movie. It's a great movie. Movie called Anthropoid. And I was involved. The producer contacted me long before it came to fruition. I gave him some information and stuff, and then he asked me to go out and help look at some of the stuff and see how it was looking and that kind of thing. And while I was there, he said, "What do you want to put a suit on and get it?" So I'm actually even in the movie as an extra. I'm in the assassination scene, which is great. The movie's fabulous. If you haven't seen the movie, you got to see it. It's terrific. He made a great job of it.
It really is. It really is. I mean, it's very. I'm sure they filmed it in Europe because it's a real.
It's filmed in Prague.
It's filmed in Prague, so it looks like Prague, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it was done. Some of it was in the streets of Prague, and the rest was in a place called Barandov Studios in Prague. You know, it was all in Prague.
So what happened next, as far as you can tell?
So Heydrich and his chauffeur jumped from the car when they grabbed the pistols. Gabčík is now stood in shock with this STEM machine gun it's not firing. So he drops the STEM machine gun and runs away, literally in the direction that Heydrich's car had approached. Jan Kubiš had been injured by the same bomb. The shrapnel and the blast had actually cut his face and his eye and his chest. But he managed to reach a bicycle nearby and made off through some streets. When Heydrich suddenly slumped, the blast had blown through the rear of his seat and injured him in the small of the back. Now he shouted to his chauffeur to get after Gabčík, which he did. He ran after Gabčík, chased him through some streets. Gabčík ran into what was then a butcher's shop nearby, hoping to get out the back door, I believe, but there's no back door. Turns on his heels, almost collides with the chauffeur, and managed to shoot the chauffeur twice in the leg with a small pistol he also carried, and then made off to a safe out through some gardens. But back at the scene of the explosion, Heydrich is now injured, and a crowd gathers around him, and some people flag just passing traffic down, and eventually a van that was delivering floor polish and wax at the time, that was commandeered, and Heydrich is placed on top of these cans of floor polish and taken to the nearby Belovka hospital. Now he walked to the x-ray machine, so, you know, and the doctors x-rayed him and examined him and told him, look, the prognosis is no problem, but there is some shrapnel and we're going to have to operate to remove it.
Is there any truth to the talk of him dying from some rare blood disease or something? I remember reading something about how he actually died. Any information on that? Any insight?
You know what? There's all kinds of theories and stuff, and I've read in books about it was the first toxin or poison bomb that had actually blown poison inside of Heydrich. It's a well-known theory. But my argument was is, like I just said, Kubiš had been injured by the same bomb and he never got poisoned. So it's either a very, very special poison that only attacks Heydrich rather than the guy who's thrown a grenade, or it's not poison. I think Heydrich died a week later, and he died from blood poisoning and septicemia. You've got to remember, when the blast, like I said to you, blown through the rear of his seat, little bits of leather, little bits of wire and spring, tiny fragments. The horsehair, the padding of the seat was horsehair. Fibres from his uniform and his shirt and his vest had all been blown into his body, tiny fibres. And these were foreign bodies inside of him. And they've just poisoned him. They got out any big bits, but tiny fragments, they couldn't get out. And of course they didn't have penicillin in those days, which would have been a big help. To me, it's just straightforward. You know, you don't need any grand theories. Just parts of the explosion are in his body that they can't get out.
Yeah. So let's talk just for a moment about the aftermath, John. When Heydrich died, then you said about 11 days later.
No, a week later.
A week later. A week later.
Attacked on the 27th of May, and he died on the 4th of June.
4th of June. Okay. So when he died, Hitler was not happy, I'm sure. This very, very high-ranking official who, of course, Hitler knew personally. Heydrich made many trips to the Berghof, in Berchtesgaden to meet with Hitler. So how was the reaction of Hitler's and Heydrich's funeral and everything?
Well, at Heydrich's funeral, Hitler described Heydrich's death as like losing a battle. That's how important this top operator for the Nazis, that's how important he was. You probably know better than me, and your viewers will know better than me. Some of the Nazi top brass made strange decisions based on, all kinds of strange things. But Heydrich was just a scientific, black and white operator using common sense. And he got results. He got big results for the Nazis. So it was a huge blow, a huge, huge blow. Some people even say he was a possible future successor to Hitler.
Interesting, yeah. And how did Hitler retaliated, didn't he? He wanted to have a little payback for the Czech people. So what happened there?
Well, when Heydrich was first attacked, of course, even the Gestapo in Prague didn't believe it when they were getting reports that Heydrich had been attacked and he's in hospital. They said, "This can't happen. It's impossible." And eventually they went down and we realize that it is him. So the SS immediately arrived and sealed the hospital off. And later on that afternoon, Prague was sealed off. And they went house to house, street to street, apartment to apartment, searching for anyone connected to the attack. And many people were arrested. Many people were executed because of the attack on Heydrich. But eventually Hitler said it was time to, as you rightly say, payback, I guess. And a village was chosen just to the west of Prague called Lidice. And that was literally wiped off the face of the earth, beginning the 10th of June, 1942. The women and children were taken away at first. The village was sealed off, and the women and children were taken away to a school gymnasium nearby, and they were kept there for 3 days, 3 nights, and the children were then dragged away from the mothers. A couple of the children were considered suitable for re-education. They were given to German families, may have had blonde hair or blue eyes or whatever. But most of the children from this village, Lidice, lost their lives in the back of gas vans at Chełmno concentration camp in Poland. The women were sent to various concentration camps, most notably Ravensbrück, and some of them did survive. And all the men and boys aged 15 and over were lined up against a wall and executed. And the village was wiped out. And incredibly, people say could have been a knee-jerk reaction from Hitler or whatever, but they were there over 12 months getting rid of any evidence of this village. It's just incredible to even imagine what goes in the mind,
Yeah.
Another village was wiped out called Ležáky. And what had happened there, the part of the resistance near a place called Pardubice, part of the resistance had a secret radio transmission system. They were sending messages backwards and forwards to London. And this was discovered. And so they went in and took another village off the face of the earth, Ležáky.
And those two towns that, I mean, how the Nazis sort of justified the retaliation on those towns, there was really very loose connection, right? I mean, if at all, a connection between those towns and the actual.
Certainly what Lita said, there's no evidence that it was connected.
Yeah.
Some people, some arguments where, they found evidence that parachutists had been staying there or whatever. But no reason. It was a couple of families had sons who were in Britain serving in the RAF, the Royal Air Force. But other than that, there's no connection that we know of to anthropoid. No connection at all. Lejarki was a different issue because they found a radio transmitter and a guy operating it, and so that's why Lejarki was wiped out.
So now back in Prague, the conspirators, Kubich and Gabčík, so they disappeared into the town, thinking that Heydrich had been wounded, but as far as they could tell, he wasn't dead. So what happened to them, John?
Well, I always, when I give lectures and stuff on anthropoid, I always like to make the point that yes, these were soldiers, but some of the civilian population in Prague and other areas, to me, were also fighters, even if their only job was to source a packet of sausages to feed the soldiers, or a loaf of bread, or information, or supply clothes the men could hide. Some incredible bravery took place of families in Prague, in this case, where families literally said, yeah, we will hide people, parachutists and people on the run from the Gestapo, incredible families. And they would stay with these families for a few days and then maybe go to another family, sometimes overnight, move to another family the next day or whatever. And so Gabčík and Kubich and other parachutists were hiding in various safe houses with brave families, incredible families, many of which were literally wiped out and all executed, the whole family, because it was discovered they were hiding parachutist or equipment or whatever. And so Gabčík and Kubich were hiding with brave families, and eventually someone from the resistance came up with the idea of it might be safer for everyone if they were put into one particular hiding place. And they found a church literally in the center of Prague, and they were brought into this church. It had an underground crypt at the church, and altogether 7 parachutists, including Gabčík and Kubich, who'd assassinated Heydrich, and Valčík, who'd given the signal. And so 7 parachutists were hidden in this church in the center of Prague.
And how long were they there? Because I'm sure that, from the first moments, a big investigation started, a big search started for these people, once they got Heydrich, stabilized. So how long were they there, and how did it end for them?
Well, the search was unprecedented, as I said earlier, going street by street, house by house, all kinds of threats that they were going to, 1 in 10 people of the population was going to be executed. And on the flip side, they also offered a big reward for anyone with information. And so they were brought in at various intervals. The whole 7 didn't just go to the church at once. So Heydrich is attacked on the 27th of June. He dies on the 27th of May. He dies on the 4th of June. And the men are hiding in the church probably from the 1st of June onwards. And they were there until the 18th of June. And what happened is that a parachutist who had come from Britain a man by the name of Karel Tjerde. He went to the Gestapo to say he had some information, and he went to the Gestapo on the 16th of June, 7th of June, and he didn't know where the men were. He didn't know the men were in the church. He genuinely didn't. He was hidden elsewhere. But he started to name some of the brave families that had hidden parachutists, including him. Brave families had hidden him and fed him and clothed him. And he named some of the families, and then almost like a domino set, one led to another, and eventually the hiding place was discovered. And the SS arrived the morning of the 18th of June and surrounded the church. 7 were in the crypt, and they were, but they decided to take it in turns to sleep not in the crypt but in the church. And so when the SS arrived, 3 of the 7 parachutists, including Jan Kubiš, whose bomb had killed Heydrich, were in the high parts of the church. So a gun battle breaks out, of course. They were killed. Kubiš died later on in hospital. He was taken away unconscious, and most people say, mercifully, he never regained consciousness. And then the SS started to search the church. Where they knew there was other people hiding there, and then the crypt was discovered, and a massive battle took place. They couldn't work out how to actually get inside the crypt of the church. At one point the SS were threatening to bring tanks in and actually blow the church up if these people wouldn't surrender. And eventually 4 shots rang out, and the parachutists had taken their own life with a pistol shot to the head.
It's an extremely sad ending for those people, and yet they succeeded in ridding the world of Reinhard Heydrich. But I have to ask you, John, some of the Czech people, talked about if this was really worth it as far as, the retaliation against the Czechs afterwards. I know that, there's been discussion about that. So how do you feel about that? Do you have an opinion on should they have done this knowing that there would be retaliation? Or I
think politics plays a part here, and I think possibly the Czech intelligence unit and President Beneš in London, I think they were hoping that once the Heydrich assassination had taken place, I think they were hoping that it would be like a spark to ignite the population, and they would start fighting and being against the Nazi occupiers and this kind of thing. I think the long-term political view was the hope that would happen. But it didn't happen. It actually had the opposite effect. People were terrified, and they carried on supplying the Nazi war machine. As for the cost, I don't think that's anything that certainly I could say convincingly whether it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. What I do know is that Gabčík and Kubiš and the others were soldiers, and I think they knew it was a one-way ticket when they left England, and they did their duty.
So now, as far as what is available to see, in Prague there, I understand that you do tours in Prague, so you take people around to these sites where the Heydrich assassination, took place. What can you show people on a tour?
Well, I do a 3-day tour, 3 full days, 9 o'clock till 6 p.m. And we literally try and do the story in my best attempt chronologically as I can. So the first place we go to on the tour is where the parachutists landed outside of Prague. So we go to the field, and I have good contacts. So often the mayor of the little village will come out and meet us and put on a bit of a reception, and then we try and follow the trail, and we go to places where they hid, these safe houses. We'll go into Gestapo headquarters. We go to Liedice, obviously. Just follow the trail as best we can. We go to the church and the crypt. I usually take the group into there's still an active prison called Pankratz Prison in Prague, and I'll take the group in there. We have to go through all the security situation because it's still an active prison. So I take them in there, and we start off on the first day where they landed, and then we finish at where I believe the bodies of the parachutists are in an unmarked grave. And it's 3 full days. And I try at night, I'm a great believer in keeping the group together. So at night we all eat together, we all dine together. And sometimes I'll bring someone in of an evening, the British Defence Attaché or someone like that, maybe, one of Gabchik's relatives or, that kind of thing. And the group are absolutely delighted.
It sounds like a fun tour, John, and I'll be seeing you there in Prague next chance I get.
Look forward to that.
That really sounds like a fun one. So, in your research for the tours and what you've written, you have met some interesting people in your journey. Can you tell us a little bit about just anything that comes to mind as far as your research, things that stick out, people?
Yeah, I mean, a very special thing is I usually get my group to meet Liedice's survivors, and sadly there's only one left now. I also try and get the group to meet Heydrich's gardener. She's still alive. So they're interesting, they're incredible to hear their stories. I'm also very friendly. We email a lot with Heydrich's son, Heider Heydrich. He's become a friend. He gave me the first interview, the only interview he's ever done, because he doesn't speak about his father. As you can imagine. But eventually, I managed to gain his confidence, and he invited me over to his home in Germany, and so I went and spent time with him, and he allowed me to interview him and include it in my book.
Yeah,
I arranged to meet him in Prague, and I took him to the house he used to live in when he was a kid, where the Heydrich family lived. Wow. And people say to me, how can you be involved with, you shouldn't be involved with Heydrich's son. And I say, he was 9 years of age at the time his father was killed. He had nothing whatsoever. It was just, to him, it was just his father. And, that's a very tragic story. It was his father. And, there's always another side to look at this. Mm-hmm. I've become dear friends with the families of the parachutists, Gabčík and Kubiš's family and Valčík's family. So I've met some incredible people, some of the veterans, and it's incredible.
It's always neat to get those little pieces of information from those direct sources that you just can't get anywhere else, So John, finally, your books now. Can you tell us just a little bit about the books that you've written and where we can find those?
Do you know, it's a funny thing, Tony. I wrote a little book, and it's only a little book, and I wrote it about Operation Anthropoid, and I wrote it some years ago. And at the time, people didn't know anything about the Heydrich attack. And I first went to Prague just after the Cold War finished, you know, because of course that was behind what we call the Iron Curtain. So it was difficult to get to Prague. And as soon as it came down, I was a young man. I went straight to, I've got to go to Prague. And there was no trail or anything, and people didn't know about it. And in the end, I wrote this book, and it just took off, and it went all over the world, literally. And I call my book The Mirror Caught the Sun, because that was the signal, or one of the signals, we believe Heydrich's car was approaching. Even now, people dispute it, but I still believe it. So yeah, I wrote a book called The Mirror Caught the Sun, and I think it's been very influential, because I wrote it some years ago. But now, Anthropoid, certainly since the new movie of Anthropoid, has become quite trendy, quite fashionable. And, you know, a lot of people are coming out with new things all the time, you know. But certainly when I wrote my book, it was, I think to some people, it was a bit of a revelation. When I take my group, I also take them to the bend that was used in the movie. It wasn't the actual bend.
Okay.
But it was still and because they've seen the movie, they think it's fantastic, you know, a film set.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking of the bend in the road, at least I realized too that has changed just a little bit after the war. You know, under the Russian occupation, it seems like they kind of changed it just a little bit. So the curve is still there, but it's maybe not as sharp of a curve. But
yeah, it has changed quite a lot, to be fair. They made an underpass at where the bend, where Heydrich was attacked. But it's, you know, you can find it. Across the road is still an original building of like a power substation, electrical substation, and so that you can recognise that. I mean, I've walked every inch of it many times, you know, so I've managed to figure out exactly where Heydrich's car was.
Yeah. Well, you're getting me really excited to go back to Prague. I can't wait.
And so you should be. I'd love to come on your tour.
You know, it's an amazing city, but this is really an incredible story, and it's an important one to share with people, because, as you say, a lot of people just don't. You know, they maybe heard of Heydrich, but didn't exactly know what happened to the guy. And these acts of courage and bravery and self-sacrifice, they're things that people need to be told. So I just want to say thank you, you know, so much for appearing, John, and giving us your time and your insight on the Heydrich assassination. It's been an incredible talk. I really appreciate it.
I've loved it myself, Tony. And for any of your viewers, I have a very active Facebook group called The Mirror Caught the Sun, the title of my book. So people may want to join that. There's a lot of very clever people in that group who've researched Anthropoid, and they're always putting new information and new pictures on. You know, it's well kept up to date.
We'll be sure to have that right up here on the screen. And also, please, everybody, visit John's website, check out his books on Anthropoid. And thanks again, and we'll see you next time, okay?
Tony, thank you.
John Primerano served in the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. He was in the wire section. So his responsibility was to lay the telephone wires from the command post to the observation posts and back. When these wires were damaged by artillery fire, John's unit had to run out there and fix it. In between these jobs, John was operating his main switchboard, which was set up in the basement of the seminary school in Bastogne. Just before Christmas, John's best friend had died in his arms, and John really had it with the war. His hands were shaking, he was sweating uncontrollably, and he left his switchboard, stepped outside of the seminary, and started to work his way to the church. The Germans were heavily bombing the center of Bastogne, but John opened the heavy wooden church door and he stepped inside. When he closed the door behind him, it seemed like he just entered this big vacuum bubble. There was no one there. It was very, very silent. John sat down on one of the chairs, took his helmet off, and started looking around. He noticed several holes in the roof, and by looking through the holes, he noticed the sky was clearing, and beams of light were now coming into the church. There was this one beam coming through the hole in the roof, and it was shining right onto a huge wooden crucifix that was lying there on the ground, that had been blown off the wall. When he saw that, he felt being embraced by strong arms, and however he was all alone in that church, he could clearly hear a voice whisper, "You'll be fine." From that moment, he felt the energy return to his body, from the tip of his toes to the tip of his nose. He stopped sweating, his hands stopped shaking. He picked up his helmet, walked back to the door, opened it, hell broke loose again. But that didn't bother him, because he knew he was going to make it. Later, when asked what happened next, he said, "Hey, I'm still here." In the years following, John made many trips back to the battlefields. Every time he visited the St. Peter's Church in Bastogne to tell the story to his audience, getting really emotional. During his last trip back, the people that were with him started to search the church. And to their surprise, in a very small room, well hidden behind the organ, the wooden crucifix was found. When John saw it again, he said, "That's the one. That's the one that changed my life forever."
Thanks, Reg. We really love those stories and stuff. That's it, everybody. That's our show. That's episode 7. We hope you enjoyed the show, hearing from John Martin today, Operation Anthropoid, and the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. We hope that you will be back in 2 weeks for episode 8, where we will be joined by Bart Gerards. He is in Belgium, and he will be talking to us about the Eben-Emael fortress, which was attacked by the Germans in the very opening hours of the West Front campaign, the attack on the Low Countries in spring of 1940. So, super interesting episode in 2 weeks, next time, episode 8 coming up. And once again, folks, 2 more episodes after that, episodes 9 and 10. Episode 10 is our grand finale. It's going to be extra long, extra special. You definitely don't want to miss that one. Stop by our website, everybody, bunkerboys.com. We hope you'll help us out there. We'll see you next time. America, be good. Don't be like Heydrich. I salute you.